Okay, so we learned a little bit about graphics in our last video, and now we're going to learn how to do a little bit more with our graphics. So if you remember, we get to our graphics module under Edit, Use a Module, Graphics, and then we also need Use a Module, Shapes. So we need both of those. So we can draw shapes on the screen, and that's all exciting and good, but what if we want to move them around? So, what if we want to make stuff out of our shapes that's a little more exciting than just circles and squares on the screen? So we're going to show you a little bit about how to do that. So first of all, if you remember, we need a window. So I've made a window here. And actually, I used make window this time instead of window. Doesn't really matter that much. I made a window, it has a title, and it's 500 by 500, my default. And then I've made a rounded rectangle, which is just like a regular rectangle, except that it's got little rounded corners. I've named it Dude. I've given, it's actually a square because these are even, X, these are 100 apart, both of them, these two X's and these two Y's. And then for a rounded rectangle, you give it a radius, which basically tells it how round do you want those corners. So I said 5, so it's round-ish. And then I made my color. If you remember, that's under Pictures, Make Color. And I made it blue. And then I set the color of my dude to be blue, which is under Actions, if you remember. And then I drew it to the window. And then I've added this new thing called forward, and I've said, if you look over here under Actions, there is a forward, and there's room to put a shape. So I put my dude, which I've made, which is my only shape, and my distance, which is 10, and this is in pixels. So if I run this, it's going to create a window, and it moves it by 10, which is okay, not that exciting. Let's run it again so you can see it. And you see it move a little bit by 10. But that's not all that exciting, moving it just by 10. So if we wanted to move it more than 10, obviously we could put a bigger number in there, but then it doesn't really look quite animated. So what we probably want to do is use our repeat. So I'm going to put repeat around that. And if you remember, this is really what's called a loop. So it's going to loop through this 3 times. Let's do it maybe 7. So now let's see what the difference is between those two things. Draw a square, and you can see it move across the screen there, which looks pretty cool. So, but that's, again, not that exciting. And if you wanted it to, let's say you wanted it to do something like move until it gets to the edge of the screen. Well, we could figure out how many times to repeat, but nah, that's not all that exciting. You know, it takes a little while, so let's delete this one. And let's figure out another way to move our guy across the screen that will have it stop when it gets to the edge. Okay, so we want to move our little square guy across the screen, and we want him to stop when he gets to the edge. So the question is, how do we do that? So to put that in plain English, what we want to do is say, while you're not at the edge, keep moving. Once you get to the edge, stop moving. So we can use this while block here to make that happen. So we actually have a couple extra blocks in here. So we want to put this forward inside our while block. Now if we leave it as while true, of course it'll just go forever. So there's a really easy way to find the center of our shapes. Any shape that you draw, you can actually find the center of it. So our shape is called Dude. And to find the center, you're going to put Dude dot center. Now, we're moving across the screen. We're not moving up or down. We're moving across to the right. So we want to find, and that's moving across the x-axis. So we don't care about the y coordinate of our little guy right now. All we care about is the x. Luckily, we can also find just the x point that's at the center of our dude. So we can say while dude.center.x keep moving. So we know what our edge is because we made the screen. It's 500. So we start out somewhere less than 500 and we keep going, and if we didn't tell it to stop, it would just keep going and we wouldn't be able to see it, but it would be going forever and forever. It would go to, you know, infinity x, but we don't want that. So while it's less than our edge, we want it to keep moving. So that's pretty simple. So while this coordinate is still on the screen, keep moving, keep going to the right. So let's run that and see what that looks like. So he moves, and he doesn't stop at the edge. And there's a good reason for that. So the center of our little guy is, of course, in the middle of the square, not at the edge. And if we want the edge to stop at the edge, we need to figure out where that edge is. And that's actually a lot easier than it sounds. So we actually know how big our square is because, of course, we made it. And it's 100 across and 100 up and down. So that means that from the center point, we're exactly in the center, we have 50 pixels on one side and 50 pixels on the other side. So that means if we add 50 pixels to this value, then that's the edge of our square. So now it will stop when the edge of the square gets to the edge of the screen and not when the center of the square gets to the edge of the screen. So let's try that. Voila, it stops. Now if you wanted to give it a little more space, if you didn't want that edge to be there, you could just change this number so that it's something a little bit smaller, so that it stops a little bit before it gets to the very edge, and that gives you a little bit of space, and then it kind of looks like the guy knows what he's doing. So that gives you a little bit of space, and you can play around with those numbers until it looks the way that you want it. Okay, so that's great. We have a way of stopping before we get to the edge of the screen. But we still just have this plain old block. So I have some programs way over here, and I'm going to bring them a little closer so you can see them. So I have what looks like a relatively complicated program, but isn't. What this program does, you might be able to tell just by looking at what I've named things here. This is going to draw some eyes onto our little square dude. So let me run my original program first so we can talk a little bit about where the coordinates of this are. Okay, so if you remember, the coordinates of our window are 0, 0 up here, and the coordinates of a square, if we're going to draw onto this square, and I'll show you how to do that, our coordinate system is a little bit different. So 0, 0 is in the middle. And to go positive x, you're going to go to the right, which is the same as the screen, and positive y, you're going to go down, which is the same as the screen, but a little bit different from what you might be used to in math. And then to go to the left is a negative x, and to go to put anything up above the center point is a negative y going up. So which is the same as the screen, but it's sometimes hard to remember because it's different from math. So if we wanted to put some eyes, like say here and here on our little square, we would want, this would be negative x and y, but this would be positive x and y. And if you look over here at what I have, it's a little bit complicated, but I did this to save actually some time. So if we wanted to make two eyes, we could say I1 equals make circle and put our coordinates in there. But this way we're going to repeat it twice, and we're going to use a variable to help us position our eyes exactly where we want them. So I've used an expression here, which is in the green section under statements, and I set this value to be x, because that's our x coordinate that we're going to start with. And if you remember, I said we wanted to start at maybe negative something, negative x, so I'm going to start about negative 30. If you remember, our square is 50 pixels on one side of the 0 and 50 pixels on the other side of the 0, so we have from 0 to negative 50 and 0 to positive 50 to work with. Same for the y coordinates. So that should be, you know, about 30 pixels away from the center. And if we wanted to go 30 pixels away from the center on the other side, we would be at positive x equal to 30. And to get there, we will add 60 to it. 60 plus negative 30 is positive 30. So we've made an eye. We made it black, set the color to black. So we made the color, then we set the color, if you remember from the previous video. And then we're using, and this is under action, so we have two draws. We have draw the shape on the window, and then we have this draw shape 1 and shape 2. And I've used that to draw my eye that I made onto my dude. And then here at the end of the loop, I increase my x by 60 to draw the other eye, because I don't want to draw my eye on top of the original eye. And I leave my y alone. You'll notice that this doesn't change. I'm going to have it be, this is going to be negative 30, negative 30 the first time it goes through, and it's going to be positive 30, negative 30 the second time through. So I want them to be even. Obviously, you can change that if you want. This is a very common construction in computer science, where you start with an initial variable, you have a loop, and you increase that or decrease that variable by something every time you go through the loop. And you can do that to draw repetitive patterns if you want. Some people use it to generate even numbers. There are all different kinds of ways that you can use this kind of construction, and we're using it, we're just repeating it twice, so it's very simple. And it's going to draw a couple of eyes onto our dude. So let's put this whole thing into our main program. So now it's gotten a little bit bigger. We draw our window. Remember, I've used make window, but you can use window. We made a rounded rectangle. We've made it blue. We set the color. We draw the dude to the window, and then here's where we start drawing our eyes, because once we have our dude, we want to draw some eyes on it. And then down here, we hit our while loop. Now, the benefit of drawing things onto a shape as opposed to onto the window, if I drew these eyes onto the window at the same place where my rectangle is, while the dude moved across the window, the eyes would stay where they were, and that would look really silly. We don't want that. We want our eyes to stay with our animation. So I'm going to run this, and you can see what this looks like. There's our eyes, and voila, he moves across the screen and then stops. So we can also add a mouth. Okay, so we're going to draw a mouth. I'm going to go ahead and put this in here, and I've just made a simple line. You can also use, there is a curve, and I'm going to drag this over here. I'm not going to show you exactly how to do that right now. That's in the documentation. But I'm going to make a simple line, which is just 2 points. And we're going to make the line black. We've already made black up here, so we're going to use it again. And I made it a little bit thicker than the default by using set border. And use mouth, and then I made it 3 instead of 1. And then I draw, just like my eyes, I'm going to draw my mouth onto my dude. And then my dude is going to walk across the screen. So let's run that and see what that looks like. Okay, it's got a mouth, and he moves across the screen. All right, so those are the basics of animation.